Good afternoon or good morning for whenever you're watching this. This is a talk on enhancing the safety critical task analysis process and outcomes, and in particular we want to talk about two different concepts related to reflecting on this process. One is the Goldilocks problem, which will become clear a bit later, and the other is the concept of marginal gains, which we'll also explain. I'd just like to thank my co-authors Jamie Henderson, Mark Sujan and David Embry for their contributions to this paper. I'm Dominic Furness and I've been working for Human Reliability Associates for just over 2 years now. The company itself was founded in about 1982-83, making it the longest established human factors consultancy in the UK. So we do consultancy work, we do some research, we do a lot of training, particularly online training now that we're in this COVID-19 situation, and we also create specialist software as well, particularly around safety critical task analysis. Now my talk will reference the software. It seems inevitable if we're going to be talking about marginal gains, improving the processes, and etc. But it's not solely to do with that. If you want to talk more about the software and purchasing it, you can come to our virtual booth at Hazards 30, which we would welcome you to. But we're really looking at the safety critical task analysis process as a socio-technical problem. So thinking about how we can reconfigure the process, the people involved, the technology, tools, the artifacts. How do all of these elements come together to affect the performance of the process and outcomes of this particular methodology? The purpose of the safety critical task analysis process is to optimize human performance and reduce the likelihood of human failure around major accident hazard critical tasks. It's very closely aligned with HSE's Human Factors Roadmap, which can be found in Appendix 3 of the Human Factors Delivery Guide for coma sites. If we see on the diagram here, we start in the red box where we recognise local major accident hazard scenarios and then select the different tasks to do with that. We then move on to a systematic task analysis, human reliability analysis and evaluating PIFs, so seeing the different failures that could occur and what conditions could contribute to the likelihood of those human failure events. We then consider our risk control measures, so can we reduce our reliance on people and introduce more engineering and design measures? When we're still reliant on people, then how can we design the conditions in which they work to reduce the likelihood of human failure leading to any unwanted events? At the back end of this, we're also thinking about not only the redesign and improvement of the task, but thinking about the development of procedures and competence standards to make sure that everything is safe and the risks are reduced to as low as reasonably practicable. Our normal workflow as a company when we're doing SCTA work is first of all to select the task that we want to look at. Then we'll try and retrieve the documentation and things we need to do a preliminary task analysis. This saves time of people involved in the workshop later on, so we can go with the workshop with something in hand to review already. So then the main meat of it, if you like, is the task analysis workshop and the walkthrough. There we review the task analysis and get that up to a good standard, do our failure and PIF analysis with operators and other subject matter experts at site. At the back of that, we'll then deliver a clear report and recommendations and also try and feed into other organisational processes. So you remember I mentioned about improving procedures and competence standards as well. That this is all part of the process potentially. Relatively early on when I started working for HRA, we were invited into a company to review and give guidance around their safety critical task analysis process, which they already had in place. We were invited to prepare a task analysis along the lines of the methodology that we use. And when we went in on the day, the idea was that we would work through that with them to see how their processes differed to ours, etc. But when we presented the task analysis to them, they said that they'd already done that particular task and they didn't really see a lot of the value of going over it again because it had already been done, and they'd prefer to do a new one. But we hadn't prepared anything else, so we were a bit stuck. We thought we would show it to them, just show what we'd done, and if there wasn't much to talk about, then we could move on quickly and do a new one. Which is really what should have happened if they'd already done it, because they would have resolved a lot of the ambiguities and issues around this task. But soon after displaying the HTA on screen and inviting them to look at it and contribute, different people around the table were drawing out issues. They were talking about particular risks with mixing up two types of tubing and whether that should be standardized. There were other issues with some of the steps, I think, and it was really interesting because whereas we should have been met with sort of quietness, if you like, there was a lot of engagement and people were talking about this task analysis, which allegedly it had already been done. Even someone around the room commented, why didn't this come up before? Now, this is all part, I think, of the tale that we want to tell here and what we want to focus on in terms of the performance variability in the safety critical task analysis process and how we choose to configure the workshops, walkthroughs, and the different things we use to support that process. So essentially they were using an Excel sheet to display to everybody. They weren't doing a proper task analysis, they were just working from the steps and the procedures, and the procedures weren't really broken down into the granularity that we would have liked either. And they were going through and doing a very rough sort of failure mode analysis and looking at the main PIFs, but generally they weren't sort of comprehensive about this. The failure modes were really whether the step was done properly or just admitted. It wasn't sort of like any more detailed than that. So they had an Excel sheet. I think that contributed with the lack of engagement, whereas we have a graphical display, which we see time and time again is really nice for people to see the task in different chunks, point to boxes and request that they be moved around and clarified, etc., rather than just seeing a wall of text. The company itself was under a lot of pressure to try and get through a lot of the task analysis in a short period of time, and so we suspect that a lot of their workshops may have been run with prioritising efficiency rather than thoroughness. So if you're going through looking to go through the process very quickly and closing down conversations, looking to converge on what it is you're dealing with rather than exploring different potentials and ideas, then you can get through the process fast, but it's not going to be as thorough as it might be. As well, there was a group dynamic where there was a couple of quite strong voices, and I think really you need the facilitation skills and conduct the workshop in such a manner that everybody sort of engages and contributes equally. So this is a nice story that sort of sets up this idea of different configurations around the SCTA process and how it can impact the quality of its output. The two concepts we want to highlight in this paper to help our reflections on the safety critical task analysis process is the aggregation of marginal gains and the Goldilocks problem, or the Goldilocks zone. So the marginal gains concept was popularised by the British cycling team, and it was Brailsford who didn't want to look at the typical thing that people normally did in these situations to gain improvement, but actually look at all the little things. So for example, they did things like test clothing fabrics, even look at the pillows and mattresses that the riders were using so they could get a good night's sleep in the different locations they needed to, cycling, diet, racing strategies, and all of the fine little details just to gain those percentage improvements. And the idea of aggregating them up is that they can actually transform into something more significant. So I think we can use something similar, although we're not looking to win any medals here, but we are looking to make performance improvements in this process, and something like this sort of brings it to life a bit. That the Goldilocks zone is something slightly different. It's based on this idea that there's trade-offs to be had. So we don't want something too hot or too cold. We want to find the sweet spot in the middle. So it's related to the Goldilocks sort of fairy tale, where she's trying different beds in the bear's house and the porridge, etc. So not something too sweet or too bland, but something in the middle that's just about right. In terms of the safety critical task analysis process, we're looking at something that's not too efficient and quick, and something that isn't too thorough and labour intensive and potentially redundant, but we want to focus on that sweet spot for different contexts, so it might vary a bit. I'll try and find that sweet spot that really balances the efficiency and thoroughness of that deployment of the method well. Now this might be a little too small for your screen, so go to the paper to have a look at this table in a bit more detail. But the rough idea here was to try and provide a scale where we move from something that is potentially too efficient version of the task analysis process to something that is potentially too thorough at the bottom there at the end. So just to focus on those two extremes, so the first one where there's no real task analysis is performed, as the team believes that using the procedures to do the risk assessment from is an adequate substitute. Only a narrow set of failure modes are considered, so for example it's just omitted and incomplete, and there's a limited sample of PIFs, and a walkthrough and talkthrough may not even be done. So this sort of resonates with that other story that I've just told, where you focus on efficiency over thoroughness. Now at the end here, so at number 5, we have the opposite end of the spectrum. So a thorough task analysis of the whole task is done. Every relevant failure mode is systematically considered for each step, and a thorough review of all the PIFs for each of the failure modes that is identified. And so the PIFs are weighted differently depending on their influence and on the likelihood of failure, and their perceived quality is at least given some sort of quasi-numerical rating by staff. And then a walkthrough and talkthrough is done of the whole task, and issues are probed for the task and the surrounding environmental factors as well. Now this really weights thoroughness over efficiency, and we've actually were invited to comment on a client's processes that were more at this end of the scale, where they were really trying to develop their continuous quality improvement, not just using the task analysis process to meet regulatory requirements, which you might find, I imagine, more down the efficiency end. But this client, albeit they weren't in the process safety industry, but they were really looking to use the process to enhance the quality and production of their facilities. And so they were really sold on doing this methodology thoroughly, but they wanted to make some efficiency gains because they found it quite labour intensive and resource intensive as well. So we've engaged with clients at both these ends of the spectrum, and really I think some of the interesting area is more in the middle, so where we're thinking about how much effort we're putting into different parts of the process, where can we make efficiency gains but not lose quality, where do we need to be more thorough to really make sure that we've done that analysis to a good standard. That's the area I think that's interesting, and that there might not be one right answer. It might vary depending on the projects that we're looking at as well. So I hope you find that interesting. Have a look at the paper for more detail, but really it's to try and spark your imagination and reflect on where you are in the process if you're interested in that. Over the next few slides I just wanted to highlight some of the major and marginal gains that we discuss in the paper. So this isn't all of them, but it just gives you a flavour about some of the things that we discuss, and of course there might be others as well, and in fact I'm sure there are. But just to kick this one off, so this was an interesting one because we were talking to a client whose main problem with the safety critical task analysis process that they reported to us was they just couldn't get staff time on site to do the workshop and the walkthroughs required. On asking them about how they had set up their task reviews, they replied that they were doing it all manually with post-it notes, and they were requesting sort of 3, 4, maybe 5 days of staff time to run these workshop exercises. Now, from our perspective as a company, we think that if you change the processes a little bit, then we could make quite big efficiency gains here. So, for example, the site could adopt the preliminary task analysis. So a lot of that task analysis work is done up front, so away from when you're doing the workshop and getting everybody together. And we think that saves everybody's time by the time they sort of come together to discuss that. So they're in a position to already start ahead and review that material that you've already done. Also, using specialist software, we can have smoother flow right from the procedures to dragging them into the task analysis software to do the task analysis, get better engagement, then a nice flow through to the failure and PIF analysis, where we can do that integrated into the software, and then even at the back end of that, outputting that into a new procedure. So we're really reducing the effort with all of the post-it notes, copying bits of information here, there and everywhere, and having it in a central location with a smooth workflow all the way through. In terms of managing and improving participant engagement, we normally find a presentation right at the start of the workshop normally works quite well in terms of getting everybody singing from the same hymn sheet and all in sort of like in the right frame of mind to contribute to the safety critical task analysis process properly. So in that presentation we might cover a brief introduction to human factors because they might not have heard of it before. Also the purpose of what we're doing. That gives us a chance to build rapport, and particularly we look to the frontline operators there and really wanting to establish the fact that it's important to get at the work as done view and not just the work as imagined. We would review the general context of the task, but also focus and get some agreement on what the major accident hazards around that task are. So we're focusing on those risks and aligning ourselves well with the HSE's Human Factors Roadmap. As we've already stated, the graphical HTA is really valuable in opening up and getting people's engagement with the task so they can see the structure of the task, move things around, and because you can do that easily, then there's reduces those barriers that might otherwise be there. Also, we've got a smooth integration of the failure modes and PIF analysis. So the PIFs are actually different for the different failure modes, and if you're going to use the graphical version of this, then that can really help people that aren't used to applying these processes sort of on a weekly basis, because it's got that knowledge built into the system. There's some tasks that you might engage with that have major accident critical task steps throughout the whole task. And so from that perspective, it might make sense just to work through from step 1, step 2, and work through the task sort of in a chronological order, doing your failure and PIF analysis as you go along. But there are other tasks that don't have that even spread of critical task steps throughout it. So for example, if you had 10 to 12 sub-goals or even more than that, and you knew that only your major accident critical task steps were towards the end, then it makes little sense to be putting in all your effort into steps sort of 1 to 10 but before you get to them, and by the time you get to them then everybody's tired and they don't engage so well when you get to the point when they're really meant to. So what you can do here potentially is to do a risk screening of the entire task, finds out what branches in the HTA your risks are, find out where your risks are, and then you can focus on those branches that have the most risk. So that uses your resource intelligently. So you're not just working through in a chronological order, but you're risk informed. You're focusing on those areas that need that special attention first of all when everybody's fresh and ready to engage. And they're also getting better feedback on the process as well, so that improves their engagement. So that helps you focus in on those areas in the tasks that require that more attention because of risk issues. And the other way we can help focus is to, if we've got a complicated map of HTA, we can just hide those branches and details, so everyone's focused on the same thing as we're working through. Photos are good to take on walkthroughs because they can provide evidence that you've actually done a walkthrough and support the clarity and any issues and recommendations that you're making in the report. But perhaps more interestingly here, we worked with a client recently since COVID's come about, so we were doing a remote workshop. But what we asked them to do is to take some photos of the task to show sort of how it was conducted and any main issues in the area. Now, what they did went beyond our expectations. They created sort of photo storyboards of how the task is performed, and it was really quite impressive, really. And what it did when we couldn't visit the site was build up that shared understanding of the major task steps and also how it's conducted, the bits of equipment that were used, and how it's just laid out on site. So some of those things that you're looking to get from a walkthrough, and these sort of photo stories appeared to work really well, and it was a bit of a novel development for us. Thinking about the final stages of this, we want to think about how we can produce a report that's well put together, that travels easily within the organisation and helps people make decisions. So we can think of trying to get together a template for an executive summary, which we have within the company, just to sort of capture all the main details in clear sections to help the company going forward and realise the value from this work. The other thing we can do after doing this work is to output some draft procedures, as the task may have changed through the task review process, and also our knowledge of where the risks are. So we want to produce a risk-informed set of procedures, but also think about the competence standards as well. And these are features of the software where we can output these things built on the task analysis we've already done to save more effort going forward. In conclusion, safety-critical task analysis is not just a technical activity. It is a socio-technical process involving different configurations of people, processes, tools and technologies. Major and marginal gains can be sought, and a balance involving efficiency and thoroughness trade-offs needs to be achieved in the right places. This should be a part of ongoing reflective practice on safety-critical task analysis within the organisation. Thank you for listening. We have a virtual booth at Hazards 30 where you can visit us. We're holding a prize draw to give away some free places on our Safety-Critical Task Analysis Facilitators course. You can find out more about that at the booth, or you can visit our website and social media channels to find out more about that and the other services that we offer. Thank you.